All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for another edition of the Arkansas Alumni Association's Lunch and Learn series. We're really happy to have you here with us today. My name is Mary Kate Harrison, and I'm the Executive Projects Coordinator here at the Alumni Association. And today I get the privilege to introduce you to our presenter, Dean of University of Arkansas Libraries, Mr. Dennis Clark. He'll be presenting This Changes Everything, Pandemic Response, Libraries, and Defining a New Normal, where he will discuss how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected libraries both on campus at the U of A and across the country. So before I begin with Dean Clark's introduction, I'd like to remind everyone to please keep your microphones on mute throughout the presentation so that we can all hear him as best as possible, and we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. So I'm going to introduce Dean Clark. He is the former Associate University Librarian for Research, Learning, and Spaces at the University of Virginia and was appointed as Dean of the University of Arkansas Libraries in 2019. Clark has an extensive experience in library leadership and overseeing library renovations. In his previous position, Clark's oversight for library services included teaching, learning, and information services, outreach and research assistant, liaison relationships, digital scholarship and data, space planning, and branch libraries. Prior to his position at the University of Virginia, Clark served as an associate university librarian and associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, where he was deeply involved in programming, design, and implementation of a $50 million library renovation and addition. He led the effort to reimagine the library services model, expanded the reach of digital media and special collections, and invigorated outreach efforts to academic disciplines. Before his time at Virginia Commonwealth, Clark managed public services at Texas A&M University Libraries, where he earned tenure in 2010. He has an extensive experience as a music librarian and served as director of the Wilson Music Library and lecturer of music bibliography at Vanderbilt University. In that role, he also co-founded Global Music Archive, a streaming digital collection of traditional music, and conducted fieldwork in Uganda. Clark currently serves on the editorial board of Public Services Quarterly and has published The Evolving Intersections of Library Services and Technology in Library Review. In Library Review, Library High-Tech, Performance Measurements and Metrics, Collection Building, and the Journal of Library Administration. Clark holds a master's degree in Information and Library Science from the University of Alabama and a bachelor's degree from Samford University. So he's been all across the SEC, but we're really happy that Dean Clark has become a part of the University of Arkansas family and that he is here with us today. So welcome, Dean Clark.
Thank you, Mary Kate. It's great to see everybody, at least in a virtual and two-dimensional way. When someone reads your bio for the first time, it makes it sound a little bit like you can't keep a job. So hopefully I'll be able to have a long tenure here at the University of Arkansas. It's great to see everybody again, and I see some of the folks who've been so invested in the libraries, and I had a chance to meet in a pre-COVID world, so it's good to see everybody there too. And I know this won't be the last time we get together. So I wanted to talk today, because it just seemed like the right topic for the right time, about the pandemic response that libraries, especially our library at the University of Arkansas, are undergoing in order to meet the challenge of today. And I'll say on the outset, I decided not to go with a PowerPoint presentation. Really happy to have folks talk and ask questions as I'm kind of going through the presentation. So feel free, if you want to ask a question as I'm going, go ahead and just shout it out there, and we'll figure out how to best navigate that with Mary Kate's help. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the pandemic. It really has laid bare many of the assumptions that we make about the intrinsic value and core work of academic and research libraries. So one of our challenges is how can we, as a group of research libraries throughout the country, meet the challenge of this new normal while embracing and even strengthening our core mission? what have we done to get us this far? What practices and policies have we done that can now be discarded because our assumptions have changed? And what takes the place of those? So I'll start with a quick story. So on March 17th, I sent an email to the former provost here at Arkansas, Jim Coleman, of course, requesting that we begin planning to close libraries at the University of Arkansas. This was just right after the Student Rec Center had closed. At the time, if you can recall, 4 months ago or 5 months ago, with any level of clarity, well, first you're doing better than I am, but if you can recall that time, the region, Northwest Arkansas, had not, and Washington County had not had a case of COVID, and they were very few scattered throughout the state. However, out of an abundance of caution, the university had begun clearing campus and had made the decision to go online only for the rest of the spring semester and for the summer, which I thought was a terrific decision. After looping in other colleagues, the provost, and talking to the people that he has to talk to, the response I got was really telling. What he said to me was, well, if we close the library, we might as well just close the whole campus. At the time, that sounded like a pretty good idea. And in fact, we closed the campus about 36 hours later, about 40 hours later, actually, was when the notice came out, when we had a case in Washington County, and the chancellor decided to close campus and take everybody to work from home perspective. But just looking at that term or that question that he asked me, or that statement about, well, if we close the library, we might as well close the campus, I think is really worth unpacking, right? And at that moment, our faculty had gone. They were all off campus because we had transitioned to online instruction. The students, we were clearing out dorms, the students were doing their coursework online. So what assumptions was Jim making? Was he like leaning into the symbolic statement of the university can't function without its library in kind of a metaphysical way? Or was he thinking about a more kind of functional statement about, if we close the library, then we're cutting off access to knowledge that our students and faculty need? Or was his perspective, given his own background as an evolutionary biologist, so entrenched in the idea of thinking that books in the library were the very most important and the very most important aspect of what we were doing? What was the physical library so essential in his mind that he could not conceptualize of the library or the university operating without it operating? But he had put this marker down, and so of course we decided he decided that we wouldn't close at that time. He felt the library was the heart of campus, and although other campus organizations had closed, like the Student Rec Center again, he thought that to close the library would be to throw in the towel and basically give up on the semester. Again, all of this was moot a day and a half later because the university had closed. But that conversation, that idea, has really made me think during this very unusual time that we've been dealing with the pandemic. And I guess one of the things that I continue to think about is, what is the library? What does this question or this statement say about the role of the library in this current situation? So we all know, those of us who are very familiar with the Fayetteville campus, that the library is literally the symbolic heart of this university. We are on the spine of campus. We are at the crest of the hill. We are literally between Old Main and the Student Union. We are symbolically part of what this university campus thinks of as its core. So I think that's really important. And if you look actually at what libraries are known for even today, it is still the idea of books. And this shouldn't be surprising, especially at a research institution. But if I go back 10 years and I look at what has been a well-quoted study about libraries in context, I'm going to read you from this report. And it's a report called The Perceptions of Libraries from 2010, published by the library organization known as OCLC. And the quote is this: "The library's brand is still books. Libraries equaling books is even stronger than it was 5 years ago. As new consumer devices and online services have captured the information consumers' time and mind share, his perception of libraries as books has solidified." And I think that's a really interesting mindset to know that even in a world where we are dealing with information coming at us mostly digitally, that the book is still the brand of the research library. One of my questions is that a positive or is that a risk for us? If you think about what the university did a few years ago to manage this question of books, we built a state-of-the-art offsite storage facility just about a mile or so away from campus. We call it the Library Annex, but what it is it's a high-density inventory warehouse for about 1 million volumes and a number of our special collections. It operates at a low humidity and a low temperature for long-term preservation format, and we have taken cues from warehousing and inventory supply facilities in order to make good use of the space. So we've built to some extent another temple, if I can use that term very generally, to the idea of book. By going off-site, we have made our books even better. They're even easier to preserve. They're closer to the proper temperatures that will allow them to exist far out past our lifetime. And they acknowledge that the world of scholarship has also changed. So all of these questions are pinging around when we need to close a library. And we've decided that because of the pandemic and because of our concerns about the virus and transferring that virus, that we're going to stop our services. The libraries are going to close. We're no longer going to provide books. And I should say that between March 16th or so and July 20th, this library provided nobody any books. But we had to. This was required. We reacted. We thought, we learned what we could about CDC guidelines from the guidelines from the Department of Health, advice from the public health officials, the WHO, different preservation groups, people who know a lot about mechanical engineering and HVAC systems, the Smithsonian even. It was fairly a deep dive of information, but we were just trying to figure out what to do. And now, just looking past the initial flush of the pandemic, we're all trying to figure out what to do next, how to reopen, how to think about keeping our staff physically distant from each other, how to enforce policies around masks, both mandated by our different municipalities and states, as well as proper practices inside our buildings. Trying to think about complicated questions that may seem mundane but are really important, about how many of our own staff we're going to allow back in the buildings until the pandemic is declared under control. How are we able to serve our users while also taking care of ourselves? Will we allow our staff to prep food in our break rooms? Or is everybody going to be brown bagging it with at their desk with a container of Clorox wipes? These are like the real kind of meat and potatoes of some of our decisions. And so these are very important, but they're not really they don't really answer the question that Jim was posing, or the statement that he was posing, which has caused me to do so much thinking. But it goes back to what is the core library? What are our assumptions that we're making about library services in 2020 and beyond that allow us to respond in this age of pandemic? What does it mean that when we shut down in March, our students and faculty went home and went online, and we still provided library services? What do we learn from that? And what have we learned in that are going to make us understand our core mission better? So I'm going to launch into a little bit of uncomfortable discussions right now, and I appreciate everybody being willing to manage it and to handle my going a little bit risky. So I would say that although our library as space is an essential and a powerful symbol on our campus, as of March 2020, we no longer needed them to provide our very core services. And what does that mean? And I say this as somebody who's been involved with library capital projects over the last 20 years. If I look at the projects that I've been involved in research libraries, I think it's something like over $175 million worth of different projects. I love library spaces. This is really a place that I have spent a lot of my career thinking about. Well, that was ill-timed. Thinking about those library spaces and kind of really being in love with what they mean for our campuses. But in an age of a pandemic, when we have this moment of this changes everything, it does make us think with more criticism about our library spaces. Our core service is this. Our core services as a research library is providing curated content to students and scholars. If you boil down everything that we do, if you think about the library as a book repository, the library as a place where our special collections are available to researchers, the place where we look at new forms of publication, if it gets down to the very core, and this is some thinking that I've been doing, our very core service as a research library is we provide curated content to students and scholars. The library is no longer the space where that has to happen. Our spaces are amazing, and they add tremendous value in our higher education environment, tremendous value for our students and our faculty. But if you take them away, as the virus did in March, we still function as a library. These are important. They're fundamentally, I built my career in their planning and their use. But if they went away tomorrow, if we were not allowed to reopen our libraries, we would still be doing the work of the library. Does this mean we should just divest from our spaces? Of course not. It does not mean that at all. And if we did strip them away, if we didn't have the choice to engage in our users in our spaces, we would lose a lot. We would lose the space to study, to reflect, to congregate. In fact, as our campus has expanded over the last 20 years and become more of a research institution, we have lost a lot of the kind of the casual and the informal spaces that our students and our faculty have depended on for decades. They've been taken over by labs and classrooms and studios, and that's great and that's important. But the library is even more important in providing that concept that designers and sociologists and architects talk about this idea of a third space. This idea that beyond work and beyond home, you have another space that you engage in, another space that you feel comfortable in. And that is often, for students in higher education, the library. We would certainly lose a lot if we didn't have our spaces. But when we look at the core, it is really the curated content part that makes us unique. Our students can go to the union to engage in some spaces. As many of you know, there's a Student Success Center going up just a few dozen yards away from the east front of Mullins. And so these are spaces where students will reflect and study and congregate. That has traditionally been where the library really has a unique role. But it does make us question those assumptions. So what does it mean, this idea of engagement with our curated content? It needs to be better connected with our communities. Our functions of providing content based on the model of provisioning that happens in and around a building. And if so, we really need to continue to challenge that thinking and continue to design and evolve an idea of librarianship for the University of Arkansas communities that is basically place dependent. Or I'm sorry, place independent. We already have a number of our programs that are online. We have graduate programs, undergraduate programs. Certainly, we're going to be looking at much more hybrid models for the fall semester, with the presumption that we're coming back to a on-person education experience at all. But being able to manage that question and how are we going to provide content in this new age how are we going to provide that curated information is important. And I think I can hear what some of you are thinking right now. What about the humanities students and the scholars that are still people of the book, right? How do research? What does research happen in those fields? Those sometimes presumed are underfunded and underappreciated in our STEM world. How are we able to support those humanities scholars and those students and the people of the book? Yes, we will still need, those scholars will still need access to the written word, to the book. And so we will continue to think about ways to provide that. We add to that research component, and we will continue to be able to add to that research idea for our students and our humanities students and scholars. But is the library the space, the necessary space for those to be used? Could we not instead focus on different kinds of delivery of those books? Right now, we're doing curbside pickup, or curbside pickup, takeout pickup. We're allowing users to be able to come into our library just inside the front door of Mullins right now and pick up books that they've requested. This is a really good model. It has helped kind of us transition from no access to our libraries or collections to some access to our libraries of collections. And so right now, twice a day, we're having students, or our faculty students are coming in masked to about 5 feet inside the library, taking their already checked out content and then leaving, trying to manage that, that process. But so could we not instead focus on more direct delivery? How can we refocus our efforts in kind of a tight budget time in order to provide more value to these students who need access to these collections? Again, I'm not arguing for the divestment of spaces, but maybe a fundamental shift on how we use and think about those spaces. And yes, this challenges the way that we do our workflow in the library, obviously. Our digitization unit has been doing amazing work over the last few years. No doubt some of you have seen, and maybe even been a part of investing in the digitization of the Arkansas Traveler, our yearbooks. These are terrific long-term projects. Those staff and faculty who've been working on those projects have had to do this work from home. They've had to try to continue to make those collections happen while they're being at home. It's a very complicated system. The University of Arkansas system still has a fairly restrictive policy on working from home, and I know that we're working through lots of that. So how can we use that working from home option right now in more advantageous ways? What does this mean for library spaces too, that we have had a significant number of our staff working from home? One of the numbers that we've thrown out looking at fall is that we might have 20 to 30% of the overall university staff, not the faculty necessarily, but the staff, working from home at any one time. Could that allow for a better work-life balance? Research says it might. Can we adapt our spaces inside the library for using them in more effective ways? So instead of having offices that are used for 40 hours a week, we have by one person, that we have spaces that can be shared and schedules that can overlap, hot desking as it's thought of. What about the provision of our services like reference? This is where this curated content comes into play. Yes, we provide content, but we also provide kind of access to that content. And this is where our expertise is extremely specialized. In the COVID landscape, few of us are rushing back into full desk reference services like many of us will have grown up with. The facilities management has already installed plexiglass partitions in front of our spaces, although we're not open yet. We're getting ready for that time where we're going to be reopened. Can we find a new impetus to engage in video like we're doing now? I would bet maybe, and Mary Kay can tell me if I'm wrong, that this online lunch and learn series with 56 different participants right now is probably unusual and maybe has happened because of COVID. So does this allow us a different level of communicating with our stakeholders than the idea of coming physically into the library in order to get help? How can we use this kind of technology in more effective ways? And I'll talk a little bit about an experience that we were in the middle of searching for 2 associate dean positions in the libraries right when we went to a COVID world. So our pools were stronger. I was a little bit worried that we weren't going to have strong pools in the age of COVID, but they were strong. But the process of trying to figure out how to interview really made us focus on what questions we really needed, what information we really needed from our candidates, and much less on the often informal hallway conversation or dinner conversation in a library, in a faculty associate dean interview. It took us some time to figure that out, but we interviewed these positions over a couple of days, and we had very successful, I think, interview schedules. I ended up being on Zoom with each of the candidates several days before they actually did the interview, so they could get a sense about how we would typically go about this kind of interview process and what we were changing. The actual interview consisted of about 9 different hours over a couple of days, far more broken up than a typical continual interview that we would see if we were with people. And that's been a fairly strong pool. We did a really good job, I think, in getting those interviews done. We learned a lot about it. We listened to some others who had done the same thing, and we ended up hiring 2 candidates or two selectees for our associate dean positions, neither of which visited the University of Arkansas before they took the position. So that challenges a lot of what we do. The library is a very personnel-heavy organization on campus. We have about 150 staff, not including our student workers, who are working in and through our libraries. So we do a lot of hiring. We do a lot of training, but being able to hire 2 people at a fairly high level on Zoom during the pandemic really makes us think about what our expectations and assumptions have been to an interview process going forward. But so should this be more of a rational part of our overall recruitment process? Can we restructure this typically fairly heavy and expensive, honestly, campus interview? Would this allow, particularly for greater diversity in recruitment? Or are we going to get more single parents who might be interested in our positions because we're not asking them to take 2 nights away for a position in a place that they've never been before? Could we not recruit more diverse candidates from a different area of the country than simply bringing a selectee into town once we're more sure that the job is the right one? And so these, just as a fundamental management question is, how will we be more effective using the moment? And so these are some of the things that I'm thinking about. But as I've talked to many people in the library about over the last few days and months, this is a great opportunity to lean into that management mantra of never letting a good crisis go to waste. And when I've talked to folks, I've been encouraging, and both inside and outside Arkansas, also my colleagues outside in other parts of the country, some of which are more directly hit with higher cases of COVID than we have here in Northwest Arkansas. But if we start this conversation by assuming that our library spaces will never be able to reopen, how do we meet our core mission in that reality? And even if it's just, and I hope it is, a thought process, if it's just something to help us kind of be better and more efficient and effective about what we do, the idea of presuming that our spaces will never open forces us to think about libraries and our offerings, what we have that is unique, how we contribute to our university scholarship, our students and our faculty, as well as how we contribute to a national and international kind of perspective on research and materials in a way that maybe we hadn't before. And so that's where I am. That's where I've been at the last several weeks, is trying to think about our core services and how we can do them well, how we can not let this crisis go to waste, how we can use the opportunity while acknowledging that our staff are kind of far-flung throughout their own homes and sitting in their living rooms and in their bedrooms trying to work. This is not a work environment that any of them thought they were going into. But how can we take that, what we've learned from that, and actually be better now and into the future? So I think that's really kind of my what I wanted to say or to proffer as maybe a place for discussion. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions about about what we're talking about, what the library's response to the pandemic has been in detail. Also, I will fully acknowledge that while I'm talking about spaces, the top 2 floors of this building are under construction, set to reopen for our students and faculty in summer of next year. I did a little tour myself of those spaces yesterday, and I'm very excited about the process. So I'm more than happy to answer questions about literally any part of what you might be interested in about the libraries here at Arkansas.
You all are welcome to unmute yourselves if you want to ask, or if you want to type a question in the chat. I will read it to Dean Clark, whatever you'd like to do to ask him some questions. We'll give people a couple seconds to type or to unmute.
Thanks. Yeah. It's great to see so many folks here.
I've got a question, and I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but do you think that once we get to a post C-19 existence, and whatever that will look like, there's no way we can really tell, do you think that the spaces in the library will become more endearing to people? Like, will, you know, instead of taking them for granted to some degree, will people be excited more? Even like students are excited to be in the libraries, do not get me wrong, they are there, but do you think they'll be enhanced in a post C-19 environment?
Yeah, you know, I think that's a great question, Rachel. Thanks. I think there's some real. We know there will be pent-up excitement about being both socially with, for students to be with their colleagues, their peers, as well as being away from their parents' house. I mean, being on campus at the other end of COVID-19. And I'm an optimist about it too. I'll be clear. I'm trepidatious about how we get there, but I'm optimistic ultimately about what we deal with. But I do think that what you're bringing up is this idea of, will we take the same things for granted that we had before, or will we be maybe more engaged in these kinds of spaces? I think that's a really good question. Certainly, you know, students at Arkansas, and I was very pleased to see this in my first 8 months of my job before we went into a COVID reaction, is they do engage with the library really well. Again, I was talking a little bit earlier about third spaces, and I was using I was talking about Student Success Center and the Arkansas Union as other places where students go. But it's more than that, right? I think the library offers a different kind of space, typically. Spaces for reflection is not something that you get in the union. And one of the great things about being here in the library is this is one of the very few places on, I'm gonna go broad, but very few places in society where you're able to do something in a public space and no one's trying to sell you anything. So I do think libraries have this kind of role of providing public good kind of spaces. And at a university, that is contextual within the university community as it should be. So, you know, I do think that when we see our students come back, there will be initially, I mean, hopefully, you know, the stress and the anxiety about COVID will continue to fade. But I do think we'll see some real appreciation of the kind of spaces, not just in the library, but certainly the spaces the university can provide.
We have some in the chat here, Dean Clark, that I'm going to read for you. We have one from Regina Hopper, and she said, is the U of A library accessible, if even online, to alumni?
So yes, we do have a number of alumni services that we offer. And actually, we're in discussions right now with the Alumni Association and in thinking about the kind of content that we can offer to allow for even more connections with our alumni community. And I don't know the specifics about all of it, so I don't want to say anything specifically, but I know that we're talking about looking at different kinds of electronic content that we can offer to our alumni community, and being able to kind of broaden their access to the physical library when they're in the Fayetteville area. So yes, absolutely. Right now, we are limiting the use or our checkout privileges right now while we're doing COVID, while we're retrieving books for folks, and while we're setting them up to those who have who are actively part of the University of Arkansas Library now, students and faculty. But yes, we are looking to broaden that aspect. You know, those of you who work with and you know in the libraries, and Rachel knows as well, no one ever graduates from a library, but no one ever graduates without one either. So we try to, in a college or school specific way, but how we can provide the broadest kind of content and connections to our community as broadly as possible. Sometimes we can, that challenges our budget, of course, but this is something that we want to.
Right, we have another one. It's from Katie. She says, so do you think as time goes on, the U of A library on campus will become more of a presentation space?
I appreciate it. Yeah, so that's interesting because the library here, Mullins in particular, doesn't really have this a good space for looking at presentations and having programs inside the space. In fact, when we want to have a staff meeting with all the library staff, we've got to go somewhere else. We have to go over to the union to find a space to actually get together. So it is a hard issue for us. I do think that if we're looking at renovation, and right now, of course, we're in the first phase of a two-phase renovation. So the third and fourth floors of Mullins are currently being renovated and will open up in summer of next year. So fingers crossed that all of that works smoothly. But soon after that, we'll begin planning for the renovation of the first and second floor of Mullins. And as you know, we have the 1997 edition. We have one side the Walton Reading Room, one side the Hodges Reading Room. And we're looking at how we can really use those spaces effectively and maybe differently for presentations, for actually the library being the center of campus, also in terms of kind of a programmatic way. How do we bring people in? How do we have connections with people? How do we basically bring attention to the research and scholarly resources in the library, maybe in different ways than we have before? So short answer to your question is yes, but it'll probably be the next renovation before we can actually look at physical spaces for that.
Great.
It seems that a lot of this, the library will have new opportunities to provide services for its clientele. I wonder if the library is thinking about maybe just developing a sort of a marketing department or something to be proactive and let people know, because it's kind of like Google. It's limited by the imagination of the user.
Mr. Bird, thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. So we do have a communications professional who works in the library. One of our challenges is kind of defining who that person we're marketing to is. Are they the 18-year-old who's just coming in from Southwest Arkansas, and they might not know anything about how to think about or use a research library at a flagship institution? Or is it that senior scholar or faculty member who knows exactly what he wants and has a level of expectations that's very, very high? So we have to try to figure out how to run the gamut and be able to market to all of those folks. We end up trying to shoot fundamentally for the undergraduate experience. That's where our kind of the bang for our buck goes in terms of being able to talk about what we are. But I think you're onto something in that we all need to do that better. And I think trying to understand what our core services are and how we're going to evolve them given kind of the realities on the ground. And that's not just COVID, that's just being in 2020 to some extent too. Being able to focus those kinds of services in a different way. And we really rely on our librarians who have relationships with academic departments to do a lot of that heavy lifting for us. And that's where we put a lot of our expertise.
If you're going to be on the same campus with the Walton School of Business, might as well utilize their skills for a good purpose.
Absolutely, absolutely. They're pretty good at what they do, aren't they? So, thank you.
We have another question from Jen here. She said, how do you disinfect older books and fragile print materials?
Thanks, Jen. So we've been going under the guidelines that we've had from different sorts of print and museum preservation groups, library preservation groups, including and up to the Smithsonian. So fundamentally, we do not disinfect physical items. We don't spray them with chemicals. We basically let them sit before they're touched. So we know from what the research has shown so far that the virus doesn't live for a very long time, except in a moist kind of airborne droplet way. And so what the advice that we're getting from preservation groups and preservation professionals who deal with print and fragile items like books and museum pieces is that we don't do anything. And so we don't touch them. So in fact, when books are returned to the library, regardless of when they've been returned right now, they go to quarantine for 3 days. And 3 days is the amount of time that our preservation groups have told us is the appropriate amount of time where you can feel comfortable using that book again by someone else. So when you turn a book in, we're going to put it in quarantine for 3 days. We're going to remove it from our book drops. Our staff will be masked and wear gloves. And there are folks that are on this call right now who do this work, who have been doing this work all through the pandemic, like Lanier Hartzell, who are doing this kind of work. So, and they'll put that in quarantine. And then 3 days later, we'll take it back so it can be in circulation.
Very cool. Again, please feel free to unmute yourself too if you'd like to ask a question.
Mary Kate, this is Stephen. I have a question.
Yeah.
Dean Clark, my wife and I come over and walk on campus a couple times a week, and we have been noticing the various progress they're making on construction on the library and how some of the protective covering for the sidewalk has been moved around, and so we can tell they're making progress. Could you just briefly, and I know I saw the drawings at one time, but tell us what type of changes will we see in this first phase?
Terrific. Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate that. Yeah, I love to talk about this renovation, so that's terrific. So in renovating the 3rd and 4th floors of Mullins, what we knew we needed to do more than anything else is to increase the number of seats we had for students and users. The library was last renovated in 1997 when the University of Arkansas had about 15,000 students. And so the number of seats at that day is the same number of seats that we had at the beginning of this renovation process. However, as you know, the student population of the University of Arkansas almost doubled during that time. So it's just 27,000 or so students. And so the stress on spaces inside the building, the stress on finding a place to study, finding a place to meet, finding a place to interact with our materials, to reflect, to work in groups as our students are doing more and more every year, was the real part of what we needed to do in the renovation. So fundamentally what we've done is in building the new offsite storage facility, we're able to use that as basically swing space for a number of our collections. So by opening those 2 floors, we've been able to kind of start over with the 3rd and 4th floor of the libraries. One of the challenges that we had was the library was built, Mullins was built in the late 60s, 1968, and with a mindset around keeping the books away from any source of light that they could. So the books were far away from the windows. And in fact, the windows in Mullins, as you may recall, are perpendicular to the front of the building to allow for not much direct light. That's really, really good for books. That's not so good for people. People like to be around natural light, no matter who or what they are. So we've been doing some work. We're going to bring back about 225,000 volumes to be on those floors of the library. And we're going to be adding about 900 seats to floors 3 and 4. They're going to go up from about 1,000 seats where they were before the renovation to about 1,900 seats now, which is going to be a terrific kind of such a great connection. So there will be spaces for students for group study, which we have not had a significant number enough in the past. So places for group study and individual study. There'll be spaces for reflective study. We will have spaces for We will have a graduate reading room for the first time, a really significant graduate reading room. We will have spaces for faculty, what some people we're referring to as a faculty studio, so our faculty can use the library in collaboration with other disciplines, not something that you have to do in your building, but something that you can do together, and the library can form an interesting kind of nexus for that, kind of a agnostic center, as I would call it. So there'll be spaces for faculty. We'll be adding or replacing a number of faculty carrels. We'll have 20 faculty carrels, all larger and ADA compliant, where we did not have those before. So we'll be bringing back all of those different aspects. We'll be increasing the number of classrooms in the building, so our own librarians can work with faculty throughout the university to do instruction for those students who are trying to learn the best use of library resources and other kinds of information. And so that's fundamentally those floors. Seating, focused on faculty studio space, faculty carrel space, bringing back a right kind of carefully curated number of volumes back onto 3 and 4, as well as just providing kind of a much more modern environment for our students to be able to reflect and to congregate and to think about what they're working on for their classes and where faculty are working on for their own research.
Thank you.
Sure. Glad you're able to see what's going on campus during this time.
Let's do one more question and then we'll wrap it up. So again, if you want to type it in the chat, you're more than welcome to, or just go ahead and unmute yourself. While we're waiting for someone to maybe put something in the chat, Dean Clark, I have a question for you. I was a student, I graduated with my graduate degree in 2017, but while I was there at the university as a student, I know everyone called the library Club Mullins. Have you heard about this? Okay.
Indeed, yeah.
Okay, good. I just wanted to see if you had heard of that. All right, we got our last question here. It's from Katie Nelson. Can you share the work the library staff has done to digitize collections for Crystal Bridges?
You know, Crystal Bridges is one of our great partners. And we've been, I've had a long-term relationship with them. The items that are in the Crystal Bridges library are in our catalog, so we provide catalog. So it's fundamentally the same catalog. So if you're ever looking for something in Mullins, you might, or in the Fine Arts Library, you might find the record says that they'll be in Crystal Bridges. So we have really strong relationships with those curators and the work that they do there. And yes, we've begun some work to digitize collections for Crystal Bridges. This is something that they themselves don't quite have the capacity for yet in their libraries. And so we're working on different ways to think about how we can come to bear the kind of the strength and of the university libraries here onto our very strategic partners like Crystal Bridges. We also have work that's going on right now to strengthen those relationships between us and Crystal Bridges in terms of looking at our collections and looking at collaborative collection building, which is a unique place for us to be. So as the university develops more into its relationship between Crystal Bridges, School of Art, Fulbright, the libraries are right in there trying to think about how we can continue to support both of those. Yes, and actually in the chat, Lori has linked to a current digital collection. So that's great. Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, we, like you said, we have the link to there, and then also Kelsey Lovewell, the Library Director of Public Relations. She has put her email in the chat and would love to know your ideas about the library, about the expansion and things like that. So feel free to reach out to Kelsey as well. But we're going to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Dean Clark, for joining us today. Thank you, all of you, for joining us as well. We really enjoyed getting to talk with you and be with you virtually today. Dean Clark, thank you for all the information, the exciting information about the changes that our library is going through and how we've been able to maintain that library purpose throughout this difficult time.